Hello, everyone, and welcome back from break. I hope you are re-energized after a week off to jump back into some Greek. So I wanted to keep this week a little bit lighter because you're kind of wading back in, but just be warned, the next 4 weeks or so after this week are going to be pretty heavy as far as the content goes. So just kind of ramp up and prepare yourselves, maybe read a little bit ahead. I'll even try to get a video up a little bit sooner for you. But for this week, we're going to be focusing on the third aspect of verbs that we haven't gone over yet. So we've talked about the tense and the voice of a verb. So just as a review, the tense are present, imperfect, aorist, future, perfect, pluperfect. Then the voices are active, middle, and passive. Now we're going to be taking a look at the mood of a verb. This is something you have probably never heard of, but you've probably heard of the words that are used to describe it. In other words, in English, we do have verbal moods. You just may not be aware of it. And we're going to be focusing on three of those moods: the indicative mood, the subjunctive mood, and the imperative mood, which I've defined there for you. In Greek, they have the same three moods, though there are a couple additional ones in Koine Greek. There are quite a few more in Classical Greek. Thank goodness we don't have to learn those. But the three major ones that we're going to be focusing on for the purposes of this class are the indicative, the subjunctive, and the imperative. There's the optative mood, and I've given you a brief little excursus about it here as I jump into Greek verbal moods. Just suffice it to say, this doesn't occur very often, so we're not going to talk much about it, and it's so similar to the subjunctive that it really doesn't matter much content-wise. But the places in Romans where Paul says, should I do X, Y, and Z? May it never be so. That's in the optative mood. There you go. So we're going to skip over that one. So let's get started with the indicative mood. So the indicative mood is the mood of reality, essentially. In other words, it's the mood we use when we're talking to each other or we're reading something that someone has written and they're describing something they assume is real. Okay. In other words, there's no question as to the reality of what's happening or what's being said in the verbal action. And in this particular class, we're going to look at three different kinds of indicative verbs. So think of this kind of like the present tense verbs that we've talked about before. So I ask you, it's a present tense verb, how is it functioning? And you would say perhaps it's a nomic present, or perhaps it's an iterative present. In this case, we're going to be looking at the three different ways the indicative mood functions. The first is the standard way, which is the declarative indicative. It's the use of the indicative to make an unqualified statement of fact. In other words, this is true and I don't need any proof. The man walked to his car. Walked is a verb and it's in the indicative mood. There is no question as to whether or not this is happening. Even if you didn't experience it, I'm telling you it's a fact. That's a declarative indicative. The interrogative indicative is simply a question. So the example I give here from Matthew 27:11, are you the king of the Jews? There's no question about if he will become the king of the Jews. That would be a different kind of mood, which we'll see in a second, but rather they're just flat out asking him, are you the king of the Jews? And then the final, the conditional indicative. This is used to set up a conditional clause, which we usually in English call an if-then clause. If this is the case, then this would be the case as well. Or if this is the case, this wouldn't be the case at all. So the indicative mood is usually used to begin that statement. If such and such is true. In other words, if this statement of fact is in fact true, then what follows is also true. So you'll see a lot of these. If they had known, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. The first verb there is had known. So if they had known. if this were the case, if this were the reality. That's what is called a conditional indicative. The biggest clue that you'll see here, and I'll show you how to look for this in the homework and the worksheet. If you see this Greek word anywhere ahead of the verb, then it's going to be a conditional indicative, because that is the Greek word if, so that's what will clue you in. You'll see an indicative verb, and I'll teach you how to go and look for that particle, and if it's there, then you know it's a conditional indicative. That's nice. All right, subjunctive. Let's jump into that. The Greek subjunctive is the mood of doubtful assertion, or the mood of a possible future. So once again, just like the indicative mood, there are several different ways, and actually I pared this one down quite a bit. The subjunctive is a fairly heavy topic to discuss. I've really pared it down. But this is going to give you the sense of something like, if I may or I might do something. In other words, you're projecting the possibilities of reality rather than stating things as a fact. So let me give you an example of one that you're going to be characterizing: the subjunctive in conditional clauses. So examples: I will give you all of these things if you will fall down and worship me. Now, this might look like a conditional indicative, as you just saw. However, the thing that sets this apart is that in this case, the Bible software will tell you this is in fact a subjunctive. And so that if will be a different Greek word that you'll see, and I'll show you how to look for that as well. And this is aeon. Aeon will always be paired with a subjunctive. So it'll tell you it's a subjunctive, and you'll just note that it's a subjunctive in a conditional clause if it's paired with the word aeon, if. Okay. The next one is another one that that'll be easy to recognize, because you'll be looking for the subjunctive verb with this Greek word before it, which is hina, which means in order that or so that. It can actually mean a lot of different things. We're just going to be focusing primarily on the result or the purpose. Okay, so an example of a purpose, hina plus a subjunctive, is I am writing these things to you in order that you might not sin. Notice there the subjunctive is often translated you might or you may. So this is happening in order that this might be the case. So it's not necessarily going to be the case, but this part A is happening to try to cause part B, but there's no guarantee. Hence, it's subjunctive, because we don't know if it's going to actually be the case. Okay, and then for the result, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, with the result that he should be born blind. So this is a slight variation. It'll be the same Greek construction, so you'll just have to decide which one of these two ways you think it's functioning. All right. That's the subjunctive when it's happening in an independent clause. So let me show you some different kinds of these were dependent clause subjunctives. Let me show you some independent clause subjunctives. The hortatory subjunctive. This is the usage of the first person plural or singular to make some sort of proclamation or charge to a group to which the person belongs. The example I've given you here out of Acts 4:17, let us warn them not to speak his name. So here the subjunctive nature comes out in that it is in fact not necessarily a foregone conclusion that the people will do this. Okay, instead the person is saying, "Hey, let us do this thing." He's charging or she's charging them to do this. Okay, and so instead of saying we should or we will warn them not to speak, it's let us. It's a request. Okay, the deliberative subjunctive is often a question. So it will ask a rhetorical question like, what should we eat? What should we drink? What should we wear? These are not necessarily meant to be answered, but as the term suggests, deliberating what should be the case. So if you see a subjunctive and it's part of a question, you're probably looking at a deliberative subjunctive. And then there's the prohibitory subjunctive. This one will be easy to spot because it will occur with the Greek word may, and it'll be translated in English as not. Do not seal up the words of the prophecy of this book, or do not be afraid. It's almost like a command, but it's a little bit softer. You might also say, let us not be afraid, or let them not be afraid. But the not is what makes it prohibitory instead of hortatory. Okay? The imperative is the last mood we're going to look at. This is going to be, I think, the most natural one for you because I think it's probably the one English word that's being used here that you all might be familiar with. Most commonly, this is used to express command, and it's in the second person singular or plural. Take up your mattress and walk. There's no subject of the verb. It's an implied you or you all, and it's telling you to do something. Take up your mattress. When I tell my kids, go to bed, go is in the imperative, and it is being used as a command. Prohibition, much like the prohibitory subjunctive, but here it's a little bit more forceful. Do not let your hand know let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. So you'll notice here that the verb is actually split up. Do, let, know. Really here it's know is the verb, but it's do not let your left hand know. Okay, that's in the third person, so it's a little bit different than a direct command. The object is the left hand. All right. But the prohibition comes in that it's a negation. So you'll look up the word, you'll see that it's an imperative, and then you will note if there's a negative particle there. And if there is, and it's translated not, then you will decide that this is a prohibition imperative. Okay? And then the final is request. This is whenever something is being spoken to a superior. So, a character to a priest, or in this case from Luke 11:1, Lord, this is the disciples asking Jesus, teach us how to pray. So this is in the imperative, but they're not commanding Jesus, they're more requesting it of him. It's a little bit of a softer. So Lord, teach us how to pray. This would be called an imperative of request. So much like you've done in the past, you're going to pull up your homework, and I'll give you a quick look at what that is. I've given you a fairly extensive passage where you can focus on your verbal moods, tenses, nouns, adjectives, and prepositions. I've highlighted several words in all of them, and then I've given them to you on the right. I want you to be able to look these up and tell me what part of speech they are, and then the type, in other words, how they're functioning. And if they're verbs, I want you to give me both the mood and the tense, and tell me how you think the mood is functioning and how you think the tense is functioning. Okay, so let me just quickly show you what I mean by that. For John 1:6, I'm going to look up to bear witness. So I'm going to open up this here and look up John 1, go to verse 6. So here I have my English on the right, bear witness. You'll notice it says it is an aorist active subjunctive, and if I go over and look at the word on the left, right here, it'll show you that it has a hina clause right in front of it. So now I know this is hina plus the subjunctive. So I want to make sure I translate it appropriately. Okay, so do that for each of the words. Sometimes they'll be prepositions, sometimes they'll be nouns, so you'll need to go back to your previous lectures, give that a shot, and I look forward to seeing your homework attempts in the forums. Thank you for all your hard work, and I look forward to talking to you.